My brother stood up at our mother's wake and told 90 people that I had emptied her accounts, and my aunt said amen. He had a printout in his hand and he waved it, and it was real and it had my name on it. That was the clever part, and I want to say at the start that I did not work out how he had done it for another 11 days, and that I spent those 11 days in a house where nobody would look at me. My name is Ada Merrow. I am 41. I am a medical coder, which is a job about reading things very carefully that nobody has ever been impressed by at a party. And until the 14th of March, I had spent 4 years in my mother's back bedroom in Houstock, giving her the 8 o'clock and the 2 o'clock and the 8 o'clock, and driving her to Rennick General on Tuesdays. My brother Corin lives in Bristol. He came at Christmas and one weekend in June and posted a photograph of her hand in his on both occasions. The wake was in the church hall, which smelled of tea urn and floor polish, and there were 90 people, because our mother taught in that village for 31 years, and everybody in that room had been 11 years old in front of her at some point. Corin got up to do the thanks. He did the thanks beautifully. He said the word matriarch, and then he said, "There's something I have to say, and I've thought about whether today is the day, and I've decided Mum would have wanted it said in front of the people who knew her." He held the printout up. 6 withdrawals, £9,400, every one of them from Mum's account in the last 4 months, and every one of them into an account in my sister's name. The hall went the particular kind of quiet that only happens in a room with a lot of folding chairs. Aunt Winnie, who is our mother's sister, and who is 80 and has a voice like a gate, said, "Amen." My cousin Sasha said, "Corin, not here," which was the only decent sentence anybody produced. And Corin's wife, Elise, who is a district nurse and has the calmest face I have ever seen on a human being, put her hand on his back and said softly to the room, "He's been carrying this for weeks." I did not shout. I have gone over this a great many times, and I think what happened is that a lifetime of being the sensible one had left me with no gear for it. I stood there by the urn holding a paper plate, and I said, "Can I see it?" And he said, "You've seen it." And I said, "No, Corin, I've seen you holding it." That was the whole of my defense. That was everything I said. I drove home and let myself into a house that had been mine for 4 years, and had stopped being mine at about 2:30, and I sat on the stairs in my coat until it got dark. I want to tell you one thing about my mother before I go on, because otherwise she is just a body in a back bedroom and a set of documents, and she was neither. Alice Merrow taught the top class at Houstock Primary for 31 years, and she had a method for children who lied, which was that she never once called it lying. She would say, "Show me how you got there." And she would wait, and she would keep waiting, and 11-year-olds would fall apart entirely under the weight of a woman simply waiting to be shown the working. She did it to me when I was 9 about a broken gate. She did it to Corin when he was 7 about a fiver, and I remember it because he cried and she gave him the fiver afterward and told him he had been brave, and I have thought about that a great deal in the last 2 years. She was not even-handed. She loved him easily, and she loved me carefully, and both of those were real, and I am not going to sit here and pretend the second one is as good as the first. In her last October, she asked me to bring her the address book and the good pen, and she wrote 4 letters and would not tell me who they were to, and I assumed, being the person I am, that it was old colleagues. 2 of them were. One was to Priya Nandra's firm, and one I have still never found. On the Sunday after the wake, 3 people who had been at it came to the house, not to see me. Sasha came and stayed and made a pot of tea and swore for 9 minutes without repeating herself. A woman called Marion, who had been in my mother's class in 1978, stood on the step and said she did not know what to think and would rather say that to my face than not say it, which I have decided since was decent. And a man from the church came to ask about the flowers and could not look at me, and left, and told 2 people I had seemed odd. Then I went and got the biscuit tin out of the cupboard over the kettle, because our mother kept her receipts in a biscuit tin, and I started reading them because reading things very carefully is the only thing I have ever been able to do. The withdrawals were real. That is the thing people find hardest to believe. 6 cash withdrawals in Rennick at a branch counter between November and February, totaling $9,400, paid into an account in the name of A. Merrow. All of it true, all of it on a bank printout, and every single one of them made by our mother, in person, with me sitting in the car outside the branch because parking in Rennick is a war crime. Here is what they were. In October, our mother was told she had 11 months, and she made 2 decisions, and she told me exactly one of them. The one she told me was that she wanted to die at home and not at Rennick General, and that she would need care overnight 3 nights a week, and that she was not going to ask Corin for money, and she was not going to have the conversation about the house while she was still in it. So every month she drew cash and paid Mrs. Berhane's agency, which is a small local agency that takes cash from old people who do not trust cards, and the difference she put into the joint account she had opened with me in 2019 for exactly this purpose, which was in both our names, and which the bank's printout, being a bank printout, described by the first name on the mandate, A. Merrow, Alice Merrow, our mother, not Ada. Corin had a printout that showed his mother's money going into his mother's account, and he had waived it at 90 people. So on the Monday, I went to the branch in Rennick and asked for the account opening documents and the signature mandate, and a young man called Femi went away for 11 minutes and came back and said that, unfortunately, following the notification of the account holder's death, the account was frozen and he could not release documents to me without a grant of probate or the executor's authority. "Who's the executor?" I said. He looked at his screen for a while. "I can't tell you that," he said, and then, in a slightly different voice, "But the person who notified us of the death provided the will, and it named an executor, and the notification came in on the 15th of March. Our mother died on the 14th, in the evening." Corin arrived at the house at 11 the next morning, and by then he had already been to a bank. That was the first thing that did not fit, and once one thing does not fit, you stop being upset and start being methodical, and I am good at methodical. I got the tin. 4 years of receipts, agency invoices, mileage, prescriptions, the lot, because I had kept every one of them. Not out of foresight, but because I am the kind of person who keeps receipts. And on the Thursday, Mrs. Berhane came to the house with a folder and put it on the table and said, "I have been paid in cash for 18 months by that woman, and I have written a receipt every single time, and I sign them, and I date them, and I keep the carbon." She sat down. "Ada, he came to see me on Tuesday. Corin?" He asked whether I would confirm that you handled all your mother's money. She looked at me. He was very pleasant. He was so pleasant, I went and got the carbons out of the shed. I need to tell you about the 2011 thing, because everyone in that village knew it, and it is the reason the wake worked. 11 years before all this, I worked in a dental practice in Rennick, doing the accounts, and there was a shortfall of about £2,000 over a year, and I was suspended for 6 weeks while it was investigated. And it turned out to be a card machine reconciliation error, and the practice manager wrote me a letter of apology, which I still have in a drawer. 6 weeks. That was it. But in a village of 900 people, a suspension is a fact and an apology is a rumor, and for 11 years there have been people in Hallstock who look at me for half a second too long. Corin knew that. He was counting on it, and it worked. And it is why Aunt Winnie said amen without needing a moment to think about it, so I could not simply stand up somewhere and explain. I had tried explaining in 2011. What I needed was documents, and I needed them from institutions because the only thing a village believes less than a woman is a woman who is upset. I went to a solicitor called Priya Nandra in Rennick, who charged me £240 for the first hour and was worth it in about 9 minutes. She asked to see the will. I did not have the will. Corin had the will. Then that's the first thing, she said. A will is a public document once probate is granted, but before that it is whatever the person holding it says it is. Have you seen it?" He read the important part out at the house. Which part? The house to him, savings split, and a line about how she hoped we'd look after each other. Priya wrote that down. Your mother made this will when? There was one in 2009. He says there's a newer one. Says. She underlined it. Ada, I want to be clear with you about what you should not do. Do not accuse anyone of anything. Do not put a word like forgery in a message, an email, or a Facebook comment. Do not confront your brother in a room with witnesses, because at the moment you have a theory, and he has a printout, and in this county that is not a fight you win. So what do? You be extremely boring, she said, for about 11 weeks. That's it? That's the entire strategy, and it is the only one that works. She capped her pen. Ada, I want to explain why, because clients who don't understand this stop doing it in week 6. Your brother has done something in a hurry. Everything he has said in public was said fast, at a wake to a room, and the whole point of doing it that way is that nobody in a room asks for the second page. Every letter you send from now on is a request for a second page. He cannot stop a single one of them. He will not know most of them are happening, and he will find out about all of them at once, in a bundle, in front of a judge. And if I'm wrong about him, then the documents will say so, she said, and you will have spent £2,000 finding out that your mother was confused and your brother was clumsy, and you will be able to live in that village afterward. That is not the worst outcome available to you. I have thought about that sentence 100 times since, so I wrote to the bank for the signature mandate through Priya, formally, as a joint account holder. I wrote to Rennick General for the medical records. I wrote to the agency for 18 months of invoices with the carbons attached. I wrote to the district council for the copies of the attendance allowance paperwork, which I had filled in and signed as her authorized representative, and which listed her address as my address, 4 years running. And I asked Priya to write to the probate registry to enter a caveat, which is a 960-pound way of saying that no grant may be issued without notice to me. That last one is why Corin came to the house. And he came on a Sunday in April with Elise, and he had a folder and the tone. The tone is the thing he does best. He is not a shouter. He came in, put his keys down on my mother's table like it was his table, which by then it legally almost was, and said, Ada, I want to help you. Do you? You've put a caveat on Mum's estate. Do you know what that costs? Do you know it stops everything? He sat down. I want to say something, and I want you to actually hear it. Nobody thinks you're a criminal. Everybody thinks you were exhausted. He opened the folder. 4 years. You gave up 4 years, and you were on your own, and you were doing the drugs chart at 2 in the morning, and I wasn't here, and I have to live with that. Corin, and I think somewhere in there the lines got blurry, and I think if you just say that, this all ends this afternoon. Take the 9-4. Genuinely, it's yours. Take it, and I'll say at church that it was a misunderstanding about a joint account. And there it was. That is what he was buying, not the money. He wanted a sentence out of my mouth that agreed the lines got blurry in front of a witness in a house he now owned, because a woman who admits the lines got blurry never gets to say the word forgery afterward. Elise was standing by the door with her coat still on. I said, Elise, did you write the 15th of March notification to the bank? She did not answer. Corin said, don't do that. You were in Bristol until 11 on the 15th, I said. The bank was notified on the 15th with a copy of the will in hand. So either you drove 3 hours with a will in the car before you'd been in the house, or somebody else did it, or that will has been in Bristol for a while. Mum sent it to me, he said, for safekeeping. She was worried. Which month? He said. I'm not doing this, and stood up, and that is when Elise said the only sentence she said all afternoon, which was, Corin, sit down, and he did not, and she looked at the floor. They left. On the Tuesday, I got a message from Sasha saying that Corin had told the family I had refused an offer to settle and that this was going to eat the estate. Aunt Winnie unfriended me, which at 80 involved somebody helping her. In May, somebody wrote to my employer, I do a job for a company in Rennick that handles coding for 4 practices and a hospice, which means I see people's records, which means an allegation of dishonesty is not a rumor to them, it is a compliance event. My manager, a man called Hal Vestry, who has the personality of a filing cabinet and who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, called me in and put the letter face down on the desk and said, before I turn this over, I want you to know I've had 4 of these in 9 years and 3 of them were X's. He turned it over. It was 2 paragraphs, unsigned, and it referred to 2011 by name, and to the dental practice by name, and to the wake, and it used the phrase pattern of behavior. Right, Hal said. Have you got the apology letter from the practice? In a drawer at home? Bring it in tomorrow, and we'll never discuss this again. I was suspended for nothing at all for 4 days while they logged it, and those 4 days took more out of me than the wake did, because the wake was a shock, and this was the shape of the rest of my life if I lost. That was the week I stopped sleeping properly. Sasha came round on the Friday and found me at the kitchen table at 11 at night, with the tin open and every receipt laid out in date order across the whole table and the 2 chairs, and she stood in the doorway and said, Ada, look at me. Are you doing this because it helps, or are you doing this because if you stop you'll have to feel it? And I said, both, and she said, fine, that's an honest answer. Go to bed and I'll photograph them in the morning. And she did, all 400 of them, on the floor with a ruler for scale, because she had watched a documentary. Those photographs went in the bundle. And on the Thursday, Corin reported me to the police for theft from a vulnerable adult, which Priya had told me he would do, and which is why I had spent 400 pounds photocopying a biscuit tin. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. The police interview took 90 minutes and was the least frightening thing that happened all year, because the detective, whose name was D.C. Okpara, had clearly read the file before I got there, and because the second question she asked was whether I could account for the destination account. I put the mandate on the table. It had come through from the bank 11 days earlier, in an envelope, with the account opening form from 2019, signed by Alice Merrow and Ada Merrow, both parties, with Alice Merrow's name first on the mandate. She read it again. She said, so the printout your brother has is your mother paying money into your mother's account. Yes, and he's had this printout since when? He requested it on the 16th of March, according to the bank's own log. She wrote for a while. Then she said mildly, Mrs. Merrow, has anyone else made a report about this estate? I said I did not know, and she said that was fine, and we moved on, and I did not understand why she had asked until later. What broke it open was not the bank. It was Rennick General and a woman called Iona Tai, who is a records officer and who processed my subject access request in 6 weeks, which is fast. Because the will Corin was holding was dated the 9th of December, and on the 9th of December our mother was on Ward 11 at Rennick General having a stent put in, and the notes for that day, in a registrar's handwriting, said the words drowsy and post-sedation, and unable to give reliable history at 4 in the afternoon, and the will was witnessed at 3, and the 2 witnesses were a man called Dermot Sale, who is Corin's business partner in Bristol, and Elise Merrow. A wife of a beneficiary cannot witness a will. Anyone can be a witness in this country, more or less, but a beneficiary or the spouse of a beneficiary who witnesses a will does not invalidate the will. They invalidate their own gift under it. And Elise, in the version Corin had been waving around, was left 11,000 pounds and a ring. That is not the kind of mistake a solicitor makes. That is the kind of mistake 2 people make in a hospital corridor with a pen. Priya read the notes and the will and put them side by side and said, right, now we can be interesting. Because if the December will fell, the 2009 will stood. And I had never seen the 2009 will either, but Priya knew who had drafted it, because there are 4 firms in Rennick, and only one of them was there in 2009, and they had a copy in storage. The 2009 will left the house to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally, with one provision, which our mother had asked for herself and had explained to her solicitor in a note that was still on the file. If either child provided her with care in her final illness, that child was to receive the value of that care out of the estate before division, assessed at the going local rate. She wrote that in 2009, when she was well, when nobody was ill, when Corin was the favorite and I was the one with the 2011 thing hanging round my neck. She had thought about it 11 years before she needed it. The hearing was in Rennick County Court in November, in a room with about 30 chairs, and it filled because a village will drive 11 miles for this. Aunt Winnie came, Sasha came, Mrs. Berhane came in her good coat and sat with her folder on her knees like a hymn book. I did not give a speech. Priya did most of it, and I answered questions for 40 minutes, and it was slow, and it was documents, and it was devastating in the way that only slow documents are. 1. The bank mandate, and the branch log showing Corin had requested the printout on the 16th of March, 12 days before he stood up at the wake and waved it. 2. The bank's death notification log, timed on the 15th, and the caller's details, which were Elise's mobile number. 3. 18 months of Mrs. Berhane's carbon receipts, signed and dated, reconciled line by line against the 6 withdrawals, with a difference of £140 that was accounted for by a stairlift service. 4. 4 years of attendance allowance paperwork, the mileage log, the prescription record, and the practice's own note listing me as the primary care contact. 5. The December will and the Ward 11 notes for the 9th of December and the sedation chart and a statement from the registrar. 6. Elise's signature on the attestation clause next to a gift to Elise. And 7, which I had not known about, and which was why DCO Copra had asked me that question in April. Dermot Sale had gone to the police in September, on his own, without being asked, because Corin had told him it was a formality and that their mother was sitting up in a chair, and because Dermot Sale had a small business and a mortgage and had worked out, sometime around August, which one of them was going to be holding the pen when this ended. Corin's barrister asked me 4 questions. The last one was about 2011, and I had been waiting 400 days for it, and I put the practice manager's letter of apology on the table, and the judge read it, and then asked Corin's barrister whether he intended to pursue that line, and he said no. I looked at Corin once, when the Ward 11 notes went up. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Elise, and Elise was looking straight ahead at nothing at all, and I understood, 11 months too late, that she had been telling him to sit down since March. The December will was pronounced against in January, and the 2009 will was admitted to probate, and my mother's care provision was assessed at 4 years at the local overnight rate and came to a little over £91,000, which came out of the estate before division, which means it came very substantially out of the house Corin had already told his friends he was selling. Elise's gift failed by operation of the attestation rule, which it would have done even if the will had stood, which is the part I think about most. He built the whole thing on a document that took £11,000 off his own wife. Corin was charged with fraud by false representation in February and pleaded guilty in the summer to a lesser count and got a suspended sentence and unpaid work, which is not prison, and which I have made a kind of peace with. He was made bankrupt in the autumn by the costs order. The letter to my employer was traced, eventually not by anybody clever, but by Hal Vestry ringing the 4 practices and asking a boring question, and it had been posted in Bristol, and I have chosen not to know more than that. Dermot Sale dissolved the partnership and was not charged. Elise left in March, went back to nursing in Truro, and wrote me 1 letter, which said in its entirety that she had witnessed a signature in a corridor because she was told her mother-in-law was fine, that she had known by April that it was not true, that she had said nothing for 11 months, and that she was not asking me to write back. I did not write back. I have thought about it a lot. Aunt Winnie rang me in February and talked for 4 minutes about the weather and then said, I said amen, and I said you did, and she said, well, and that is the closest that woman will ever come, and I let it be enough, because she is 80 and I have got what I wanted, the house sold. Corin came to see me once, in October, before the bankruptcy, and stood on the step of the small house I had bought and did not come in. You could have just asked me, he said, about the account. One question, Ada, and none of this happens. I did ask you, I said, in the church hall. I asked if I could see it. He stood there for a while. I didn't think you'd fight. No, I said, that's the only thing you've said in 2 years that I completely believe. He said, she'd be ashamed of both of us. And I said, she'd have made you show her how you got there. And that was the last conversation I had with my brother. I bought a small one on the other side of Houstock with a shed and a bad kitchen. Mrs. Burhane's agency has 4 more clients now because Sasha, who did not shut up once for 11 months, told everybody in the village who kept the carbons. And the biscuit tin is on the shelf over my kettle. It is a Christmas tin with a robin on it and a dent in the lid, and it is still full of receipts, mine now, gas and water, and a stairlift service I no longer need. And when people come round and ask why I keep them all, I tell them my mother did it, and that she wrote a provision into a will 11 years before anybody was ill, and that between the 2 of them they taught me the only thing I have ever really needed to know, which is that the person waving the piece of paper is almost never the person who has read it. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next.